And 1 second, I'm going to assume everybody wants to see me, so I'm going to start my video as well. Okay, there we go.
We can see you.
Good. Okay, excellent. So yeah, thanks for everybody for showing up. This is going to be a great session. I have a lot of organization up front I want to tell you about. Essentially, like these workshop RMDs. Yes, we're still rocking RMDs here. We got them all in this repo, Rich Iannone / Pointblank - workshop. So all the stuff that's in here also lives here. It also lives inside your environment, which is going to be up for a very long time. But it's also here, and it's the same stuff. So just in case, it's good to have multiple places to go for this sort of thing. And because of the format of this particular workshop, we're going to scale it down a little bit. We won't do the last module, but we will have this sort of schedule where we start. I'm assuming we're going to start at 9:20, because I'm going to talk a lot with these preliminaries until 9:20. And then we'll do module 1, which is Intro to Data Validation. We'll take a break. We're going to take a break pretty often, so we can just decompress every now and then for about 10 and maybe later on 5 minutes. And the break could have some Q&A too. I'll be around, so you can always save your questions to that, or you can ask questions in the middle. Totally fine. But multiple opportunities for questions. So I'll have a break at 10:20 to 10:30, and then we'll do modules 2 and 3, which is scan your data, expect test functions, those two, and then another little break, and then modules 4 and 5. Then again a break, and then we're going to have a special guest. Ramanathan from Fiser. He'll demonstrate a point-blank Shiny application he has in development. It won't be anything that you can touch because it's still in development. It's under wraps, but it'll be a great preview, and just serve to reinforce like point-blank stuff in ways. And it's a great sort of preview for the future. So good stuff. And then there'll be more questions at the end, like more opportunities for questions and wrap up. Okay, so yeah, this is the workshop right here, and it's kind of crazy. There's no link here to Pointblank proper, but if you want to look at things like documentation for Pointblank, you could go to, I'm just going to find it right here. It's in the repo RStudio / Pointblank. Used to be under my own repo, but it got moved to RStudio, so thank you, Posit. And what's here is, a whole README, but the key thing is the website right here. And within that, you could find a ton of information, including articles, which will cover quite a bit of the same stuff we're covering here, but maybe a little bit differently, So these are good. And there's a giant reference section, which goes through each of these functions in the package and has lots of examples within each one of these, articles for each function. So this is good reference material for later. But for now, we're going to go to this, which is the workshop. So I'm going to lay out again. We got these modules. We won't do number 6 because that's essentially a continuation of data documentation, which is data dictionaries. But we will do the first 5. And also I'm going to say, okay, if you don't have the package and doesn't really matter right now anyways, because you got the environment, or maybe you're doing this at home, like, sort of in your own IDE. Totally fine. So if you need Pointblank, you can install packages, Pointblank. You can also do DevTools, install GitHub, this is totally wrong. It should be RStudio Pointblank. The dev version right now and the release on CRAN is not that much different. It's got like 1 or 2 fixes, but nothing like too major. Basically, the workshop materials will work with both. So it doesn't matter what you install if you plan to go that way. Okay, so now we have that sort of like, described, the itinerary, all that stuff. We can just go on with the actual workshop materials. And the way I have it is just 1 RMD per concept. And I don't have a lot of stuff you can fill in. Really what you do is just like absorb, just listen and maybe just mess around with your own RMD file that you have. Change a few things, rerun it. And there's plenty of opportunities to sort of change things and understand things that way. So I encourage you to do that instead of filling in some blanks or just here's a question, you answer it. It's kind of a little bit complex at the beginning to do all that stuff. Better just to follow along. Okay, So let me show you data validation, point blank style, as I have it there. So we're going to use a few packages. Point blank, obviously, we use some tidyverse as well, mostly for dplyr. Blast is there for emailing, because you can actually email some of the things you get from point blank, which is kind of cool, like the reporting. And we use one of my favorite data packages, Palmer Penguins. That's going to be part of the mix here as well. Okay, so we'll talk about one of the workflows for data validation in point blank. And it involves three basic components. This is like the agent workflow. So this workflow involves creating that agent. So what the agent is like the main data collection and reporting object. Okay, so this is when you want to create a report. You got a whole bunch of like data validation statements, and you want to know something about a data set, like how good or bad it is in terms of data quality. Okay, so we declare the agent, we create that, and then we declare validation steps using validation functions. Pretty much as many as you need. There's, just as many as you can write. More is better. And then finally, we ended off, it's kind of like a validation sandwich, if you will. You end it off with the interrogation of the data. You use the interrogate function. It just tells the agent to say, here's the plan. Now go at it. Interrogate the data essentially, and create that report. Okay, so we start with that function, create agent, and we define how the data should be reached. So it's kind of like this right here. So we have, we're going to create the agent object. You can call it whatever you want, obviously. And then we'll call create agent. Usually inside here, we say like, here's the data, the table that we want to interrogate in the end. Then a number of validation functions. These are different checks of the table. So we use things like values and the column names and other things like that. Each validation function is a little bit different. And then finally ended off with interrogate. That's like do the thing. Okay, so we got a small data set. It's really very small in point blank. It's called small table. It just fits in one console screen like this. Just meant to like get you to understand how validations work with a pretty easy to read data table. So we don't have to like look around and make sure our validations are correct. We can sort of like check our results, as we're using this. It's kind of like a fun little experimentation table. Okay, so let's use that. We'll create our first agent, and we'll use small table in the TBL argument. You also have a chance to provide a table name. Most of the time, it'll sort of like get it just from like the actual object, but you can just sort of specify it. And this is good for reporting later on, just, in case you have like a complicated statement in here and it doesn't really know how to get the table name from it. You can just say, this is small table. And different from that is label. This is like a label for the entire validation check. So we can call this one, just for fun, workshop agent number 1. Okay, so let's run this. Great, so it's doing a bunch of stuff with, library, and then here we go. Because I printed off in the end, we get this little tiny thing. I'll actually print it off here on the side so we can see it a little bit larger. Not much larger, but a little bit. So what we have here is essentially an agent with no interrogation and no validation steps. Basically, there's no interrogation performed and there's no plan. There's nothing here. So that's good though. That's what you expect. There's nothing here. We just create the agent, but something appears. So let's go to the next step where we actually do things, add in validation functions. So a lot of them begin with call. What that means is like they're doing column-wise checks, like checks in every cell within a column, or checking that the column is some type, like a column is logical, call is numeric. This one, call vals, just checks every single one, every single cell in the columns you put here. And it can sometimes check for greater than or equal to some value. It could be that all the values here in column F are part of the set, low, mid, high. And you can also put in multiple columns in here. It'll just expand it out. So call this character, columns B and F in this small table. It's the same thing as writing this out twice and saying like it's B and it's F. We're just combining it here. And then we have another one, which operates row-wise. It's called rows distinct. This is just asking, or pretty much asking to check whether each of these rows doesn't have duplicates. Okay. So let's run all this. I'm going to run it like so. I just get this stored into agent 1, and then I'm going to print it right here in the console. Okay, so a little more different. Still says no interrogation performed, but at least now we have some steps, which is good. And if you hover over each of these, you'll see like a little like plain English, like what we're going to do in each step. It sort of does that for you, which is good. We have nothing in here. It's kind of like blank because no interrogation. So we got to change that. We have to run the interrogate function. Okay, so let's do just that. I'll run that. And yeah, and I'll scoop agent one, put it over here in the terminal and run that. Okay, totally different now. Okay, I know this is a bit small, and Julia change it now, but we have it here now, and we have some stuff in here. So this is really good. So we see here a lot of green. That means these checks were totally like flawless. We can see like right here in units. These are called test units. Okay, so there's 13 rows in this table, small table right here. And because these are checking like every single cell in a column, there's like 13 units, right? 13 cells, and they all passed, and there's no failures. So this is like a fraction right here, and this is like the absolute number of passing or failing. Okay, this we'll get to later, this WSN and this. Okay, get that to a little bit later. But some of these checks are like, involve one test unit. It's basically the entire column. Is it logical? Is it numeric? Is it character? And we saw these right here, which are called as character, that expanded from this right here, this statement. Columns BF, we have B and F here in two separate lines. Okay, so two separate checks. And then we have rows distinct. Okay, but we might notice like the green here is a little bit faded. It didn't quite work out perfectly. It looks like we have two failing test units. Because really in small table, there are some duplicates. Really hard to spot. That's the whole point of using point blank. It's really hard to see them. But I can sort of see them because it's such a small table right here, two duplicates in a row. And I bet you there's two more, which, well, actually, that's it. It just counts them as two in this case. It's a little bit weird, but that's the way it is. And then what happens is once you have that, you have this little CSV button. And it says right here in this little popover, there are two fail rows available as a CSV file. That just means if you have this report in front of you and you have like another person that just maybe doesn't know R, like a data engineer, you can just like press this button, you get a CSV file, and you can pass that over and say like, fix this. This is like the failing bit of this data table. It's like, make sure this doesn't happen again. And maybe that'll be fixed. But at least you have something. Like for each of these, if there's any failing rows or anything like that, it'll try to give you the records, which were the problematic ones. And hopefully you have things like ID values and such to identify what those rows are so you can get to the root cause. So that's like the very beginnings. This is how you do an agent-based validation report. And we did go through each of these, except some of these we did not go through. This TBL column, a little bit strange. That just means that we took this table and we didn't modify it. What you can do in point blank is you can, for each step, you can modify in place the table and then run a check on that modified computed table. It's kind of nice if you want to transform it and check, the results of the transformation, like maybe a summary. You create a summary and you have a new row and you want to check the results of that row. You can create some pretty advanced validation checks that way when you can sort of reshape and create new data on the table, as long as you don't mess up that reshaping process. But on that tip, you could even like look at this column called a val. This will just like tell you that the actual like validation went off without a hitch in terms of the calculation. Say, for instance, you might have a situation where you look at a column which doesn't exist, say column Z, call as character. It's not there. So this will just show an explosion. It'll be like, nope, sorry, that's not there. But the report will still run, which is pretty important. So this report always wants to run. It always completes, but it tells you about problems. Okay, so that's what the val column is for. Okay, because you don't want two problems where like your validation's messed up and then you have bad data at the same time. Okay, so let's take a look at thresholds because we see nothing currently in the W, S, and N columns. And I also want to check that I have any questions. Do I? Nope, no questions in the chat. Okay, I'm always going to check. Okay, so we have nothing here. What are these? This actually stands for warn, stop, and notify. And these are merely like labels. They don't actually warn, stop, or notify. They're just like little buckets you can use. And you can assign thresholds. And then there's suggestions for like, like severity really in your data. So what you do is you create this action levels object using the action levels function. And what this function does is it allows you to create levels, and optionally you can assign actions for when like things like the data quality gets worse than 15% of failure rate for a single step. Okay, so that's what this means. This is a proportion of the total amount of test units failing, right? So 15% is kind of like, not bad. 25% is like, a little worried. 35% is like, notify somebody. This is like, all hands on deck. Let's fix this. That's what this is. You can actually create this object from action levels, and you can actually print it, and it'll show you, sort of like what you set. Okay, so that's what's there. It's a little demo of what you could use in the agent report. Okay, and we went over test units. Basically, these are the little units which are like the score for a particular validation function. But let's use the action levels object that we have, and we'll pop it into this as an argument of this function. So there's an actions argument in create agents. And what you can do with that is you can, you can either use action levels here or just, create the object, put it in there. And what this does is it'll create a default for all the steps in your validation report. So basically, if this step right here has, or let's see one has like multiple test units, like this one right here has more than 15% of a failure rate, it will signal on this report. Great, so let's actually run this. So we have a number of these validation steps. They are expanded from before, but only a little bit. They have, we have column values between 0 and 4,000 in this stage. We have a regex testing function here. So we're checking the column B adheres to this, this pattern. And we got a few more checks of columns. But the key thing here is we have this now. Okay, so let's run agent 2. Just going to do it right here. Great, so now it's running. So now we see different things in the actual console here. We see like warning condition met, stop and notify conditions met. Okay, so this is actually doing something. So let's take a look at the report now, agent 2. Okay, so there it is. So now we have a lot more colors happening, a lot of red, a little bit of blue happening. That's because like some of these were purposely made that they would fail a bit more than before. Okay, so in this particular one, checking regex, we got a red condition, which is stop. And the cool thing is here we have like the actual, it's echoed here. These are the thresholds for failure rates right here, 15%, 25%, or 0.35 of the total test units for a step. So here in this regex, the regex was obviously bad, or the data was bad. But what we get is only 6 test units or 6 cells in this column B passing or matching this regex, and 7 of them not matching. So what happens, we go in sequence, this got tripped, this one as well, and so this one, because really we had a failure rate of 0.54, which is way above 0.35. So we get all 3 of these lit up. Same with call vals and set. The set here was low and mid, but we know in our small data, we also have high. If you just check it out, we also have high in here, and that is not part of the set that we defined here. So a lot of these cells are like, no, this is not part of low or mid. This is actually high. So we got some failures here as well. 6 failing test units. And again, this is much more than the threshold, the highest threshold. So we get all this. So this is really good to have. Especially when you're checking data quality and it's bad, you want to improve, you want to get below the threshold, or you expect some amount of bad data, depending on what the data is. Sometimes you just want pristine data, or you expect that pristine data. So you can actually use absolute numbers for these test units, for these action levels. You can say like 1 or 2. But in this case, we have a proportion of all the test units. Okay, so let's move ahead. I guess I can ask, is there any questions? You can throw stuff in the chat. Maybe it's pretty cut and dry at this point. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so we've checked this. And we have lots more CSVs we can click on and they will download. I'm going to click on one of these just so you can sort of like see that it downloads. There we go. It's called extract, and then like lots of zeros and then the step name. You're supposed to relate that to to the actual like validation, but you can do that in a different way. You can just save it. Great. So that becomes a CSV you can actually sort of like share or just look at. And I'll show you later on, there's other ways in R to actually get the same data. This is just like a nice affordance when you just have a report in front of you, published somewhere, for instance, and you don't have R next to you.
Hey, Rich, you got a few questions coming in now.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I see it. Okay. Yeah, okay. I got it now. Okay. So how do we export all the checks as one CSV? So there's a way to do that. I guess you mean the failing rows, like this CSV could be one thing. There's a function called point blank. It's called extract. No. Get data extracts. So that's how you do it. You give it the agent. We're going to give it agent 2. And we can get them all as a list here. And then conceivably, you can take this and make one CSV file. You just sort of combine together, do something cool, but we combine like the step number, and you can make one CSV from that. But this gives you enough to go on to do that particular thing. So far, the tests seem to target just a single column. Are there any tests that check across multiple variables? Call A have value X, and then column B should have value Y. Yes, there's something for that. There's a function called, and there's so many functions I have to sort of jog my memory by doing this. I think it's call vals expr. This is kind of like when you're like, oh, none of these other ones are good, but just roll our own expression. And in the help, which is very helpful, it gives you examples of just that. I'll flip to one right here. So we make a little tibble, we open one up, and we got like something like this. But there's something more complicated in the spirit of what you're showing, which is kind of like this, case when, these things. You could even do more than that. You can pretty much give any expression you want, as long as you know your data well and use the right column names and things like that. So that'll serve you pretty well for that sort of thing. Okay, I believe that is the only two. Yeah, great. So I'm caught up. Okay, so I mentioned before that you can set this action levels for the entire like validation. So it serves as a default. But you can also, for instance, do a thing where you could override that, and each of these validation functions has an actions argument, just like create agent. So you can interject your own specialized one at any point. You can just say action levels here is different. It's warn at 1, stop at 3, failing tests, notified 5, instead of this one where it's a fraction and it's different. So we can do that. I'm going to run this now. Agent 3. The only variation is this, where we included like a special action levels object. So I'm going to run that right here. Get the report. Great. So same defaults as before for the the entire thing, except for call vals between, which is this one has its own specialized one. See, you can see it failed 1 at 0.808. That was matches 1 absolute failing test. So that gets the warning label. If it didn't have this, it would be blank because it's below the default one, which is 0.15. Okay, so you can do like things like that. You can have several of these. You can apply them in different places. So you can imagine you can shape this sort of like warning system to be anything you want, right? Set default or not, set default, override, things like that. Is it possible to apply a test within a group by and compile results in only one viewer? I don't think so. I'm not quite sure what that means. No, I'm going to say no. I can't even imagine how that looks like. So no. Okay, so that is that. You can have flexible reporting with thresholds. And it gets echoed in the console as a little preview, but in the report, that's where everything's kind of like laid bare. So now is probably a good time to look at the different validation functions. I skimmed through a few of them, and there's lots. There's 36 of them. Here they are. So a lot of them are pretty simple. They're, like you're checking a value, whether it's less than, equal, not equal, greater than. These are all kind of the same. Whether values are between a range or not between a range, within a set or not within a set. There's usually like a negative version of some of these. These ones are kind of special. They must make a set. So that's what these ones are. And there's also checking for, in this case, I said null, but it's actually NA. But because Pointblank works on databases, this null thing is actually more correct in that case. We looked at checking for patterns. This works mainly for text. But if you're actually checking numbers, that kind of works too. We didn't advise it, but it'll actually convert the number into a string and check that. And there's other functions as well, which are a little more complicated, except for these call is functions, which just checks for the type of a column. Okay, so we got a question. Is it possible to customize the output of the validation results table, or does it come out as a GT object? Kind of like both. So you can take agent 3, and you can pipe it through get agent report, like this. And you do have customization options. You can change the title. You can change the ordering of things. You can even have it so like it's just like not a display table like this, not a GT table. You can set this to false and just get like a data table, and you could like create your own report from that. But what you get if you do keep it as a display table, which is the default, and you change the title, you just say like new title, for instance, and run that. Great. So once you do this, get agent report, it becomes a GT object. Before it isn't, but now it's formally classed as one. And then you can just take it away and do different things like with GT. I can't imagine what that would be at the moment because it's pretty customized. But if you wanted to, you can say like, add a column, for instance, with calls add, and then, pop some values in there. Or you can modify the look of it too. Or you can do things like GT save and save it as an image or some other format. So that's what you can do with that. So get agent report is your friend there for customizing. There documentation of all the validation functions. Yes, there is. And that's actually in here. So I'm going to put that into the chat. Just right there. Of course, you'll have like all of the inside your help files inside R Studio, of course, or wherever you're using R. But they're also here too, and it's kind of nice because you click on one of these, and there's lots of examples at the bottom, which is nice to have. And you can just copy paste into your own environment and play with them a bit, make sure they run, and there's really lots of functions, so this is super useful to have. Is it possible to filter showing the notifications from the viewer? Yes, there's one small way. You can do this and do arrange by, and there's two options. Well, you do severity. I don't know if this helps or it's what you're looking for. Actually, this is pretty good. Then you can show just the things at the top, which are, they're bubbled up in terms of like what failed. These are the things you should look at. And these are like, not as important. Everything was fine. Perfect. There's also another one too. You can add on to that and say keep, and then fail states. One more thing. This is actually kind of useful. If you combine these two things, then we just get the bad stuff that happened, which is nice. So if you want to email, for instance, this, or get notified about just this could be useful because the rest is kind of like, business as usual. Things were fine, and so this is a good combination. Okay. So let's move on. So lots of functions. Thankfully, there's documentation. So we're not going to like look at each of these. That would take like a day to do that. So let's not. But let's look at a different workflow, which doesn't involve an agent, but involves the same functions, like all these functions here. We can actually use these functions directly on data. So small table, for instance, we could, let's look at it again. There's a small table. we can take one of these validation functions and just run it on small table. And what happens? Well, what happens is this validation function acts as sort of a filter. It'll pass the data through if nothing's wrong, which is kind of nice, like in a script. You just want to do a check and keep the chain going. But if there's something wrong, it'll either fail or warn, which is good if you have a notebook or a script that if it fails, it stops a process. It stops things further on from happening. You have a serious problem. So that's what this does. So I'm going to run this just to show you and see. There we go. Small table. It's as if we just ran this, like nothing changed, but we ran it through this. Okay. So here's a situation where values in column A, let's take a look at that for a second here. All values should be between 5 and 10 inclusive, but we know that's wrong because we have 2 there, we have 3, things like that. So let's run this now. Okay, so we get an error, totally expected, because this, we have failing test units. And it tells you, like, in language that we have an exceedance of failed test units where values in A, right here, should have been between 5 and 10. And so that then tells you, like, the absolute threshold level was 1. That's a default, which you can change. But initially, when you use this, you can use an actions level object to change that default. But most of the time, when you're running it this way, you want to check if there's any errors at all. But you could change that. So because we have like many failures, it just creates an error. Okay. So let's look at this one here. This one passes because small table column B is a character type. Yeah, totally true. And this one, call is numeric, columns date, totally not true. Let's run that. Again, error. Okay. So any one error we get, including like the ones that have 1 test unit, will fail. So that's a pretty good default, just having 1 failure. Okay, so let's look at rows distinct. So what that does is it checks whether you have, a little hint here, error true. It'll show you that we have duplicates in our table. And with the just the beginning of the small table, we don't have that. The first 6 rows, no duplicates, so that runs fine. We get the data table passed through, and it is like this right here. Rows complete. That is kind of like, that just means, I don't know if you know the concept of complete rows. It means you have no NAs in any of the rows, like any cells. So this row right here, 4, is an incomplete row, but every other row here is complete. So we can run that. Obviously, because we see this, we have incomplete rows. So we get the error. But we can do a subset. We can take datetime. This is like computing like a different table, sort of like selecting just the datetime, date, A and B columns, and checking whether that's complete. So that's nice if you have something like a synthetic ID that involves like a few columns, and you want to check that at least in those columns, there's no NAs. Yeah, great. And of course, you can always like do a fine-grained check NAs in each column. But this at least just tells you for a group whether there's NAs or not, which could be useful in lots of cases. Okay, so I got a question here. Is it possible to run these checks on all the data sets available within a particular folder? Look for duplicates in all the data sets. Yes, you can do that. There's a bunch of workflows. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought someone's talking. There's a bunch of workflows where you can like have it set up where you have YAML. You can export all these checks to YAML, for instance, and you can run just in a script that YAML on the different data sets. And also you can do this even for instance, we won't get into this at all because it's kind of like pretty advanced stuff. Like once you know Pointblank pretty well, but you can do things like you could have like this little function which gets all the different tables and then names them. So basically you have little recipes for getting the tables, and then you use those little labels for the different validations. It's kind of like it's kind of built for lots of checks. You just have data coming in day after day, lots of different tables, and you want to check them frequently. So there's definitely functions for that. I invite you to check out this right here, this help reference near the bottom, like YAML execute all agent and performing YAML tasks, things like this. This is good for large volume workflows.
Mm-hmm.
And they even have a way to, I'll show you this later, to compare multiple agent reports together with this multi-agent object. Okay. Great. Okay, so let me show you some other functions we have. Oh, I have another question. Okay, can you check whether within the grouping of one or more variables you have unique rows? Only check for uniqueness within those grouping variables. Yes.
Okay, man. Explain.
Mute. There we go. I have the power to mute. So one thing you do is you have this function rows complete, and we just showed you that you could get a subset. The same thing works for rows distinct. You have a columns argument, and you could specify columns, and then we're checking for distinctness in this basically new table, which has only a subset of the columns. Yeah, I think that answers that. Yeah, great, perfect. Okay, so we have a lot of functions, obviously, in this, like of this type, validation functions. I'm going to show you a few more, which are pretty useful. A lot of them end with match. So we have call schema match, super important. I just want to emphasize that. Row count match, maybe less important. Call count match, maybe not so important. Table match, maybe important. Who knows? But yeah, we can use these. Let's look at call schema match first. Well, actually, no, row count match. That's what's first. So we're checking here that we have exactly 13 rows in our table. Okay, do we? Yes, because we got the data back. So this matched an exact number. Sometimes, you're doing a thing to a table, you're affecting the number of columns, but you don't want to see more rows, maybe a join, you could do weird things. So this is useful for that. But also we can put it in another table here and count, like maybe the original table and then the transform table here. We can arrange it that way. And you don't expect to count the change, for instance. You can do that. So we can shove another table in here, and it'll just take the count from that table and compare it with the, the input table. Is this one right? I don't know how that's right. Oh yeah, because it's number of columns. And it just incidentally, Palmer penguins has the same number of columns as small table. Nice. So if you did like say empty cars here, I bet you it would be totally wrong. Like it would fail. It does. Different columns. But I just want to show you that, you can compare two different tables. Maybe not wildly different tables like this, but maybe like a variation of like the table, like a transform table and the original table pre-transformation. So that's where this is useful. And we did the same thing with row count match. We could also use a table here in place of a literal number and see that the row counts match between two different tables. I didn't show you this one, call schema match, but it's a bit more complicated. But I do invite you to look at it in the help later, and maybe we'll come across it later, I think. But what call schema match does, and this is really useful, and we actually will come across this later, is it checks that your structure of your table is what you expect. Okay, so you can create schemas. We can say like we have this, we expect column A to be integer, we expect the name to be column A, we expect next to have a column B of the character type. That's our schema. And then we put the schema object into call schema match. We're using it on a table, and we expect that table to have that structure, this definition for the columns. Okay. And this has options too. Like a lot of things have options in Pointblank. We could make it so that we loosen some of the requirements. Say, for instance, we don't have to have the column names in order. That's fine. We can be a little bit like less strict. Like the column types don't have to be super exact. Maybe there's like 2 types on a column, and we just specify 1 as long as there's 1 type. That's good. And we can also specify a partial schema. So if you have complete equals false, we can just say we have at least these columns of these types in this table. We're checking for that. Okay, so let's go back to our workshop. And table match, I didn't show this, but you can actually match 2 different tables, and with your main table and a comparison table, and it is exactly the same. So what it'll do in order is check that the has the same number of rows and the same number of columns, has the same schema, and has all the same cell contents. If any of those fail, then the table is not a match. So it'll try to accurately match two tables. And this is kind of cool because you might have like a table which is, in a database, but it's really the same table as the table, like the R table. You want to check that. You can sort of check it with table match. Okay. Try to give you reasons for these functions being there. Okay, any more questions? Because we're going to jump off to, okay, great. We have a question. Can we extract which cases failed? We ran the function like rows complete and we got an error message. Yes. We're actually going to get into that right here. Yeah, that's going to be like, this is like post-interrogation operations. So we're going to just sit tight. I'm going to show you that right now. Lots of different ways. And we got a question here. Table match is so nice. Migrating from other systems. Okay. Basically just a cool comment. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So let's look at some of these functions here. A lot of get functions here. So get data extracts. So let's actually run get data extracts on agent 3. And I showed you this before really briefly. It's basically just this, like a list. And it's basically all those little CSVs that we have in here, but in table form. And they're all named by the validation step. Okay, so you can piece those together. It's very terse. It doesn't tell you exactly, what the step is, but we can get that. There's another way of doing that. But I just want to say that you can also specify a particular step number, and just get that, isolate that. And if you do that, it just gives you like a tibble, not a list of tibbles. And what if you do something that is like 8? That is there too. 7. Okay, it tells you that this step did not have an associated extract. Nothing failed there. Okay, so at least it tells you, gives an error. If you're just like sort of like checking, you're rooting through and you're just checking all of them. So that's get data extracts. We got another function here called get sundered data. Kind of a strange name, but sundered just means split. I went through a thesaurus to get that. And because split is used so often, I wanted to have something a little bit unique. So get sundered data, it was. So with that, you can get rows, which are either, in quotes, good or bad. Let me explain. This is not, if your methodology allows for it, you want the best parts of your input data or some other process, like say you just want a subsample, but you don't want any like missing values in there, for instance. So with this function, we can provide an agent object that has interrogated the data, and what we get back is the pass data piece, and these are rows with no failing test units across all the row-based validation functions. So if the validation function is checking cells, you'll get rows where none of the cells failed within that row. Okay. Or you can alternately get the fail data piece. Okay, it's like the complementary piece. So it'll split basically and give you the same number of rows. The addition of like the pass rows and the fail rows will equal the number of input rows. So you can get the failing rows, for instance, as well. So you want to see all the stuff that failed. You can do that as well. So let's do that. Let's take a look at this. So let's create a new agent 4, and we're just going to run 2 functions, like 2 validation functions. Call vals are greater than the value of 1000 in column D. And for column C, we want to make sure that the values within there are between the values in column A and between the values in column D. So here we're doing something a little bit fancy. We're using values in columns, not literal values. Okay. And if we encounter any values, we'll just count them as passing. We won't say that, they're failing. Okay, so let's run this, agent 4. Okay, and let's actually look at the report because, it's a good thing to do. It's going to be kind of a small report because it's only 2. But we do get some failing test units, quite a few in these cases. We don't have any warnings set or, like any disaction level set, totally fine. But what I do want to show you, the whole point is we can pass this agent to get sundered data. And yeah, look at that. This is basically the rows which had no failures. Okay, so if you look at this, the values here, just so we check ourselves, The values are in column D are all greater than 1000. Let's just check. Yeah, totally are. And the values in column C are between A and D values. Okay, so A and D, yeah, they're all between. Great. NAs, they pass, so that's fine. Okay, and between is inclusive, so even though we're at 4, it includes the bound as well. Okay, interesting. So say, for instance, you want to get the complementary row. This is just to show how the function works as well. So let's do type equals fail. We can do that. So we should see none of these rows in here. This is like the complementary set of all the failing rows. So there's either going to be a problem with the between part or the greater than part, and sometimes both in one row, but at least one of those. Okay, so that's how we get the bad data, as it were. We can also get all the data with a new column we just call it PB combined, so we don't have to collide with anything else. We just give it this name, and it just tells you whether it's pass or fail, like in the actual table. So combined, it will give us a new column with pass or fail. Sometimes you actually want this somewhere, but you don't want pass or fail in there. You want something more specialized for your task at hand, like it's a flag column. You can set pass or fail to be anything you want. Just do it in the right order. This is pass, this is fail. So if you set true and false, then all the passing ones are true. False are not passing. Or you can put numbers in. There we go. Sometimes you want this, 0 for passing, and then 1 for there's a problem. Or you can switch this around, whatever you want, whatever you need. So that is get sundered data. Lots of ways to sort of split your data depending on your validation results. Okay, let's just see how we're doing for time here. We're almost done this. Okay, so I said I go until 10:20, plenty of time. Great, because this will take a little bit of time. So we're still taking the results of the validation, which is the agent. We run interrogate. So basically, when you have an agent that has an interrogation done, as we did before, we can run a whole bunch of functions to get data from it. Another one of those is called get agent xlist. Kind of a strange name, but I'll explain. The agent xlist is a record of information that the agent possesses at any given time. So understandably, when you're interrogating the data, you can collect a lot of information about the data, how you're basically, what's there, how the validations ran. We're storing all that in the object. And we're going to give that to you with, you just have to use this function, get agent xlist, and it's all there, and it's all organized for you as well. And there's lots of ways you can get at it as well. Sometimes you want to get the entire bit of data, or sometimes you want it just for a single step, right? You want to focus in on one step and get all the information for that step. So we give you those options. So we got agent 3. It had 10 validation steps. Let's just run the bare get agent xlist, no arguments on that. We'll create this object xlist3. Okay, so we'll run that. And then we're going to take this object, put it in the console, and see what we get. Okay, it's quite a bit here. I'm going to expand this down just a little bit here. So it gives you like this fancy printing of this, tells you this is all steps on the top right. Because we didn't specify one step, this is just for the entire agent, all the steps combined. And we get, it says the xlist for small table. We gave it a name before. Here it is echoed as small table. So we see a lot of dollar signs and then like different, like names. We can access each of these in the xlist. Basically, it's a giant list, but we're going to tell you we're going to give you a preview of what's in that list and let you know, what different handles you have. I mean, you can always like get the structure of the list, but that's kind of a pain in the butt. So we just give it to you right here. And we give you a little preview of what's in here. We have like, these are POSIT values, and there's 1. And these are all character, and they all have 1 each. Because this has to do with the entire table or the entire process. Some of these have like, 10, there's 10 rows. So we're checking, each of these rows. So let's actually look at some of these. Let's look at these. So let's look at $N. A little hard to find, but it's right here. Okay, so if you run this gives us a number of test units in each validation step. So it's a vector. So this is validation step 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until the end. Okay, a little bit difficult, but that's like sort of like granular atomic information. If you know how many steps there are, you can also get the step names and things like that. That's all in here. But you know what's here, basically. You can also get the number of passing test units in each validation step. Use and passed. That's kind of cool. So nice. So you can do things like, any greater than 5, whip your own sort of like mini threshold check. True. Okay, maybe that's a problem. You can act on that with the xlist object. You can do any sort of logic you want. There you go. So number of passed in each validation step. This is 1, 2, I don't know how many steps there are, 10 steps. And we can also get the fraction of passing test units each validation step. There we go. So a lot of these, so instead of fraction failed, we can get that as well, right there. I'm actually going to run that. There we go. There we go. So it should, if you combine this together, they should add to 1. That's the whole point. But we get them both in case, you want to, like use this for reporting in your own way with either of these types of values. We can also get the warn, stop, and notify states. And here we're just doing a little thing where you arrange them in a table. And we can also use the step numbers as well. Let's take a look at that. There we go. So we made a little table there. And we're just showing like for each step, whether we got warn, stop, or notify. Basically replicating what we see in the report, but this time in a sort of like, like a table view. And you can do whatever you want with this, because it's just a subset of the report. But you have it as an object in R, which is kind of good. Okay, so that's the agent xlist. And like I said, it's huge. You can get things like the report object, the email object, which is a Blastula message. We'll get into that in a second. You can get the report HTML as like an HTML string. If there's like little problems, like evaluation errors, you can get like things there too. And the time start, time end, lots of little things. Just everything you need is right there. Basically, the reporting was created from something like this, basically all the data. And another big thing you can get, I didn't really mention this before, is the validation set. I'm actually going to run that right now. 1 sec. Okay. Validation set. And this gives you a table, which is almost like this report. It's even bigger. It's very wide, but it gives you lots of information on each step, right? And it gives you like the results of the interrogation as well. So this is like really huge. This is probably more than enough you need for any reporting you want to create by yourself. So you don't have to hang on, like use this report. You can make your own if you wanted to. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on to emailing the interrogation report with email create. So there's a few ways you can do this. You can email a report, and we can use Blastula for that. That's another package. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's a package that is available at Posit. If you go to GitHub again, we can look for Blastula. If you can just find it. Here we go. So the whole point of this package is to create HTML emails and to send them either through SMTP, basically your own email server. So you can use things like Gmail, Outlook, other third-party SMTP servers. And you can also use Connect with Blastula, which is quite nice. There's actually a lot of examples where we use Pointblank with Connect and do emailing of reports. And that's all mediated through Blastula. But anyways, what you can do is you can create a Blastula object, or you can directly send through this right here. Okay. So let's say, for instance, we're using the xlist again. If any of these notification logicals were true, so I won't do any. I'll show you which ones there are. Okay, quite a few false, but there's a few trues. we can use something like this, like a conditional, and then create the email. So let me just create the email by itself, because this actually won't work because it's just like some dummy values. Let's create the email. So I'll show it to you like in the viewer. Great. So it gives you this. You can customize this, by the way. You can customize the header, the footer, the, like what's inside. And this would be the email that someone would get. It might be you, for instance, if you're running data quality checks all the time and there's some failures, you can run a script where it would check. And if it's beyond some unacceptable threshold, you can fire off this email with a combination of email create and blastulous SMTP send. Or you can have it done in Connect, which is actually a lot better. You don't have to use this because reports are generally emailable as they are. And you can create an email part anyways using Blastula. So many options for notifying. Well, many emailing options. That's only a big one. But there's other things you can do too. I've seen, basically, if you look around in various blog posts, people have done things like use Slack to let people notify. People get notified about like validation problems running, in some sort of process, automated process. So, but this is pretty good though, because it doesn't require much work. Like if you just run email create and then pass it to the agent, it'll make this for you. You can customize this. You can even change the language of this as well. There's many languages supported in Pointblank. So I'm not sure if it's here. Oh, I get it. You have to change it in the actual agent itself. Okay. But if you did that, you would get in a different language, the text would be different, essentially. Okay, so that is email sending via Blastula from Pointblank. What you can do as well, and I've touched on this before because there was a question, you can customize the interrogation report using get agent report. Because we don't have to, accept the defaults. They're a bit like, not great, but you can change them. So we have agent 3. Let's change the title. I'm gonna run that right here. Okay, so we call it this time title, the third example. And notice we just use markdown, like 2 of these stars, asterisks on each side. It became a bold third, so it just automatically uses markdown. It can interpret that and use it, which is great. I showed this before, but it's good to show it again. It's arranging the validations by severity. Really, it's not a fine-grained thing. It's basically the most severe to like the least. And this is the only choice you get. But that's fine, because you don't know what's going to appear anyways. But this puts it in the function's hands to arrange it in a manner which is the worst first, and then like not so bad later. And I showed this before as well, but worth repeating. You can get, you can use the same thing, arranged by severity, and just keep the fail states. So like this. So if we run that again, there we go. So we're just keeping like the worst stuff. Nothing that's green is here. And you can also do the other thing, just keep fail states, and that should preserve the order right there. This is the thing I wanted to show you earlier. At least in Get Agent Report, you can have a chance to change the language. So I'm going to do that right here. So you can change it to, I think, one of 12 different languages. And things like the hover text will change, and like the CSV, the titling, and things like that will change, which is quite nice. Okay, so that's it for this module. So just to sum up, we learned quite a lot. And I know it's not super hands-on because I really wanted to show you the stuff with, sort of like me stepping through it. But I totally encourage and invite you just to change little things like I did. Experiment with like the xlist, change some of these validation steps, modify some values, change the columns, maybe pop in something like this, like vary it a little bit, do things like that. It gives you some understanding of what you're doing. Run it constantly, and then you'll pretty much get it. Yeah, so that's my recommendation for for working with this RMD file. So just to sum up, dial validation in Pointblank requires the agent, like create agent, that function, a number of validation functions, like I said, just 36 of them, quite a lot. And then an interrogation, which you would use the interrogate function at the end. The agent, once you do that, or if you do any of those steps, it'll create a report that tries to be informative and easily explainable. Okay. And we can set data quality thresholds with the action levels function. There can be default data quality thresholds and even step-specific thresholds. In both cases, they're supplied to the argument called actions. So create agent has the actions argument. Each of the 36 validation functions has an argument as well, in case you want to insert it there and override the defaults. 36 validation functions, they'll have a sort of similar interface and many common arguments, as much as possible. And they can be used with an agent, with create agent, or directly on the data. If you use any of those functions directly on data, you can chain them, and it'll act like a filter. It'll pass through the data. If there's errors or warnings, those will appear, and you'll get an informative bit of text saying what the error or warning was about. We can get data extracts pertaining to the failing test units in the rows of the input data set with get data extracts. Right. You can specify a step number or just get them all as a list. Okay, and there's an option to obtain sunder data. Basically, these are data splits between good and bad, depending on which validation functions you used. More validation functions you use, you might turn up more errors. You might get a different splitting. So, but at any rate, you can get the splits of good and bad data with get sundered data. Okay, and we showed you the get agent xlist function. It gives you like a giant list with a pretty decent preview of what's in that list in terms of the names of the different objects. You can use those for reporting. You can use those for programming, wherever you want. It's all laid bare right there in that one object. Yeah, and like I said, useful for programming with the validation results or whipping up reports. We can also create an email message using a specialized version of the validation report, which is that small version. If I go back a little bit, we'll see it. Basically, it has less columns because there's only so much room in an email. So you just put like, the main things. So that's what we show here. And it's a little bit smaller as well. So that's a specialized bit, really. That's what that refers to. And that integrates with the Blastula R package. So you can send it through that. And off you go. You can create nice alerting for your validation. And finally, the report can be modified with the get agent report function. So you can specify the title. You could, for instance, just get a tibble back of the report and not a GT object. You can change other things as well in that function. Quite a few options there. Okay, so I think that's it for this module. I wanted to cover the first module in one block. Let's see if there's any questions. I think I missed one or two previously. Does the package offer any features for automated rule set generation? In scenarios where we already have a large data set, it would be useful to automatically apply a variety of validation algorithms to identify which are most effective. Excellent starting point, setting up a validation agent. It has to be accomplished. Yes, you can. Okay, let me show you that. I'm going to actually show you that like in the next module, but I'm going to give you a little preview of that in the help. So I'm going to go back one. The function for that is called draft validation. So I'm going to click into that. So the title for this function is draft a starter point blank validation .r.rmd file with a data table. Okay, so let's click into that. And you can sort of see where we're going here. We create a file. And that's like a starting point. Like it's like a scaffolding of like lots of validation steps based on the table you provide. So let me show you that, what it looks like in practice. Say, for instance, we have the storms data set from dplyr. We're just borrowing that data set. Yeah, it's pretty good. We could run draft validation on that table, just insert it there. And with the defaults, you can, of course, specify things. It gives you this file. Okay, because that's the way you sort of mentioned how storms is, the two colons just become underscores. You can change that. just by specifying the output file name. But anyways, it gives you this. It gives you like this file. This is what the contents of the file looks like. It's got the library statement, point blank. It creates an agent. It gives you this for free. It puts in the data like that. It gives you some suggested action levels. You can change this, pull it out, up to you. It just puts it in there just so you know it's there. It's an option. And then it gives you comments and then validation steps from the data. So it provides ranges based on the data itself, right? This could be wrong. It could be, not realistic. You can change these things. This is just a jumping off point. But the cool thing about this thing, it assumes that the data is correct, and this thing will run and there'll be no errors because it's using the data. And it's basically a perfect model of, like what the data is. It tries to give you as much as possible. If the rows are indeed distinct, it'll pop in rows distinct because it'll pass. It'll provide the column schema and then put in a column schema match function in there as well, and give you all the different types in the columns as part of the schema. So here's the report if you run it. So it's runnable as is. If you run it, everything passes because it assumes everything is right. But perhaps this is not right. Some of the data is wrong, or some of these like ranges are not good. You can use that. But it tries to be smart. It tries to be smart at least. Like it knows about things like latitudes and longitudes. And even if your data doesn't wrap to -180 and 180, it just knows from the column name that's longitude, and it just gives you the right values. And same with latitude. So in some cases, it knows about the data, and in some cases, it doesn't. So it uses a combination of like column name and inference and some checking within to do that. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. And it's satisfactory. We'll go over this a bit later, like that actual function. Basically, we'll do that again. But it's good to know up front that is part of the package.
Hey, Rich, just a quick note, maybe a quick break. I don't know if you had that.
Yeah, let's do a break.
Got a little poll here. If you see that on your screen, Phil, go ahead and answer that. I'll leave it up for another 20 seconds or so. And then, Rich, I thought you might find this kind of interesting.
Yeah, everybody's new. Yeah. That's great. Also, there's a question here. I'm going to answer that. May I ask why export as CSV versus RDS file? It was sent to me directly. You don't see that. But I'll answer that directly. It's not a personal question. Basically, in the reporting, like why CSV files? Because oftentimes you're an R person and the data engineer is a Python person or someone who doesn't really know R. And to keep it as general as possible and as accessible, we just opt for CSV files for that one bit of in that report. They may not know what RDS file is. They may give you a blank stare if you mention RDS files. So I figured CSV files is the way to go. And you can always through get data extracts, you can make RDS files anyways. So I hope that answers the rationale for that. Oatmeal. Great.
We can see it.
So yeah, great. So when I was on break, I did a little bit of work. I ran some of the things in the next module, so you wouldn't have to wait so long. Some of these things take a while. Apologize for that. HTML generation is not always a fast thing when you throw a ggplot into the mix, and it gets a bit slow, but not too slow. It gives you a lot for your time. Anyways, let me show you what the next module is. It's all about scanning your data. So, so what is that? That really involves one function, scan data. That's part of Pointblank. Why would you do this? So sometimes you just get a new data set presented to you, or you know nothing about it. It's like, got this data set, we're going to do a look at it, print it out. You can there's lots of ways to examine it. Use Glimpse, use Skimmer, all good. Data summary. There's lots of packages and functions to do it. So basically, Pointblank has one more of those functions. It's called scan data. So it's simple. You just use that on the data, and it gives you a scan data report. This is one for Palmer penguins. So let me show you how that looks in terms of running it. So You can have navigation bar. I'll show you that later. It just appears at the top. It lets you navigate between the different sections of the report. For this case, I just showed you that you can take it off. And then, yeah, so the table is the main thing. Palmer penguins raw. And let's actually go through the report just a little bit here. So right at the beginning, it shows you overview of the data set. And then there's one section here, overview. It tells you right away the structure of the table, how many columns, how many rows you have, what proportion of NA values you have in the table, if there's any duplicate rows. And then some super simple breakdown of the column types. Okay. So if you see something strange here that you don't expect, you can see it right away. You know, it's like too many columns, or why so many NAs? You can sort of see right away, what might be wrong with your table. And then we have other things here for reproducibility, just the time that you ran this, the version of Pointblank you use, the R version, and the OS. Okay, some good to haves on this tab. And then here's like the really cool thing. Each variable or column is broken down. And sometimes there's details depending on the type of column. So study name is a column in Palmer penguins raw. So let's take a look at this. If you press this toggle details button, you get things like a little table to tell you the common values in the table. So really just have 3 values here and different lengths of the strings. So pretty much all 7 there. So because we just have these ID values. We might have things which are numeric, and that gives you a different set of details, like stats, for instance, some common values, so common numbers, and sort of like the most common and least common. Okay. And then you just run down each of the columns has these, and you might see something, interesting or not, depending. You may see something like a really small string length, which is unexpected, or an outrageously large string length, which may also be unexpected. So you can get ideas for your data validation here. You can sort of suss out little problems right away just by like looking through this report. You can get familiar with your data set at the same time. It's really quite nice. Let's go through a few more of these. Region looks to be just like Anver, just 1. Islands, I noticed 3. There we go. So that matches my expectation. Stage, I don't know what that is. Oh, okay. So stage. Yeah, great. Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at the raw data for penguins, but here it all is. Let's check out this. This is actually a measurement. This seems like a better thing to like look at in terms of like the details. And this is where you can see like the quantile stats. This looks pretty nice. Looks reasonable. Nothing's too big or too small. Yeah, basically, this is good stuff. So, and yeah, so that's what we get for like the different variables, the different columns. You can have details. Sometimes there's no details depending on the type of column, but we try to put in details. And then we have this, which may or may not be useful, a set of interactions. This is pretty good for modeling, but maybe not so much for just checking out a data set initially, but maybe you can sort of see correlations, which you may expect or not. But who knows? Something like this may be useful. It may jump out at you as being important. We also have another set of correlations here, also maybe important for modeling, but maybe not. So the cool thing is you can also, when you create the report, you can exclude these sections. It's like you can say, for instance, these are totally useless for you. Just exclude them from your report. You can set the options in scan data, and I'll show you that. But a thing that maybe you shouldn't exclude, it's really cool, is this missing values, plot. Essentially, it shows you like all the different columns, and these are split up sort of like sectors, almost like as if you're zoomed out and looking at missingness from afar. This is the bottom of the data set. This is the top. It scales really nicely to huge data sets too. You have something in the millions. It would just be cut up into sectors, and you'd see like whereabouts in your data you have lots of missing values. You can sort of see at the end here, near the bottom, we have quite a few NA values at the end for quite a few of these variables. And this common section, which seems highly optional, has a lot of missing values. So it probably makes sense. But it's kind of cool. You can sort of base your validations on this, right? You can sort of say like, is this expected? Okay, maybe we won't check this for nulls, but maybe we'll check all these for having nulls, not having nulls, that is, or NAs. And then we get the very end is this little GT summary plot or summary table. It just shows you the first 5 and the last 5 values in the table. Sometimes it's good to have a little summary, just so you have a glimpse of the data and sort of see what's in there. And then all the rows in between are just missing. It tells you where the data is sort of cut out in the middle. Okay, so that's a typical data scan report. And you can use any data set you want, as long as it's tabular, as long as it's a data frame, tibble, data table, data doc table, as it is. You can use all those. Okay, so we have all these sections, and they have names: overview, variables, interactions, correlations, missing, and sample. Those are the names of the different sections. And we can, the first letter allows you to create a string, which makes you include or exclude, and even order these sections in any order you want. So in these next two examples, I have scan data running on safety data, Adam, ADI, and Adam, ADVS. I just made a little pronunciation of that. I think it fits. Let's use it. So I actually ran those, and let's see here. Yeah, I got this one right here. And so we just wanted the overview, and then S, which is the sample, and then the variables. So that's what we have here. We have that overview. The sample is kind of first, not last, or second. And then the variables are here. So I'm going to tell you another cool thing. If you have column names which have labels, they'll just be echoed here, which is kind of a nice touch. So that way you sort of like have something which is like, true column label, and also like a label for the column as an attribute. That's actually echoed here. So we can toggle the details and take a look inside. It's pretty good. Same as before, really. Just arranged differently. I'll go to the very bottom, and you'll see that that's where it ends. Okay, we've got another one here based on ADVS. There it is. In this case, I wanted the overview, which is right here, the sample, and same sort of thing, the sample and then the variables. Great. Okay, and I mentioned this before. Another cool thing you can do is have the report in different spoken languages. English is a default, but we also have like French, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Turkish, Chinese, Russian, Danish, Swedish, and Dutch. Just use these two-letter language codes, and off you go. So we have here Star Wars. This is in Danish because we ran it like this. And we have the overview right here, the variables, and then like the sample. And everything should be translated in terms of UI here. Like this is in Danish. There we are. So if you need it, it's there. And then all things like formats, like numbers, get formatted to that locale as well. So the usual things like periods will become commas and commas will become periods, things like that for numbers. Okay. So we talked about in the last module, not really in the module itself, but as an aside, we have this function called draft validation. So it lets you create a validation plan just from the data itself. It's kind of like scan data. You just give it the table and it gives you something useful. In this case, that something useful will be a validation, a set of validation statements with an agent in a new file. So let's run this. So we got storms. We're borrowing that again from dplyr. It's a really good data set. It's been updated recently too, so that's the thing. And then draft validation, we're going to run that. We can use this tilde or not. It just means that if you were to run it, it would grab it again. Like if you were to say read it from like S3, you had a long statement, it would run it all over again instead of taking an assigned object, which may have sat there for a while. So it'll grab it right away. It'll just run the instructions essentially to do it. A little distinction, but sometimes useful with changing if data is changing rapidly. Let's actually run this. Oh yeah, sorry, this changed. There we go. Oh yeah, we already have that file. Okay, so you already know some of the features now. It won't overwrite files which already exist. And it gives you the file name you specify here. So let's actually look at that file. It's called storms validation right here. Okay, so I have it opened up. So this is pretty much what we saw last time in that help file inside the website. When you run this, it'll give you this exactly. And the cool thing is you can run this right now. So I'll just run this, that statement, because it's actually in our script. Everything should be okay. Great. And then run agent. Great. There we go. And some of these things change because previously I modified this file and introduced some errors. That's why, but typically when you run this initially, nothing should error. Like it shouldn't have things stopping like that. I sort of messed with this file and in a previous workshop. But anyways, this is kind of cool because you get everything sort of like written out for you. It tries to like perform validations on lots of different columns as much as possible. Again, if something is like not right, you can change these, for instance, but you're off to a good start. Basically, you have the thing in place. You just have to tweak values. This might be, well, this seems correct. And a day should be integer. Value should be between 1 and 31. You may have something more complex where it checks like, like a date and whether it's valid or not. But this is not a bad start. This is not a bad start. And this is what this gives you. It gives you a lot, basically, from that one function. And there's little things you can do too. You could, for instance, if you don't want the comments, you could just say add comments false. Otherwise, you might just delete those comments, which is kind of a pain. You can choose to overwrite old files. You can make it quiet in the console so it doesn't echo anything at all when you write the file. And you can change it to, like, say, for instance, RMD. I think it's like this, but it might be a different keyword. But you can choose between .r and RMD. Okay, so that's basically it. So scan data. This is a super short module. It allows you to check your data. Takes a little while to run. I suggest grabbing some food, some coffee, make some tea while the thing's running. It may take up to 30 seconds to run that thing with all the different sections. Again, HTML generation can be slow and it's checking a lot of stuff. The other thing, which is super useful, if you want to start a new data validation on a new data set, run draft validation. Just give it the data, get the thing, which is like the .r file typically, and then work with that. Change things, add some new validation functions to it, delete some you don't want, things like that. So it gives you like a head start. Okay, I'm going to check if there's any questions asked in the chat.
But you got a few here.
Yeah.
If you scroll up to the top, I'm not sure if you did the one by Tom. Are there capabilities? See that one?
Yeah, let's take a look. Are there capabilities short of writing custom functions that check data with an experimental unit like a clinical study object? Think how you use Pointblank for PK profiles for individual subjects or for days repeats within treatments. Yes, there is. Sorry, had to think about it for a second. Each validation function has a thing for that called segment, I believe. So let's go to one of those and I'll show you what that is. Blank, call vals, any one of these. Let's say equal. Oops, I'll just go to equal, but it doesn't really matter. But it's simpler to look at. Look at the help there. And the argument I believe you want for this for panel stuff is like segments. And the way you use that is not too bad. It's a little complex, but we show you examples here. So it's an optional expression or a set of expressions held in the list that serve to segment the target table by column values. Each expression can be given one or two ways as column names or a set of as a two-sided formula where the left-hand side holds a column name and the right-hand side contains the column values to segment on. Let's take a look at what that means. Let me show you some examples here. Yeah, it'd be in the segment section. Yeah, so you do something like this, A column, group 1, group B, and you run the validation on that. It'll just do it separately as 2 steps on the first group and the second group, all those rows. Or you can just choose one group and like have like basically a subset. And then you have combinations of these subsets, which basically multiply and create different validation steps based on the same validation parameters. You're just basically splitting it out. Does that cover that? Hopefully that does. I think it's on the right track at least.
And I think Tom had a follow-up at the bottom. You might see that. What I'm referring to are.
Oh yeah, that's right. You mentioned that. Yeah, more complex relationships on the table within the data, where the experimental unit is not a row but multiple rows. Okay, yeah. So another thing you do, there's lots of things. You can either expand things out, or you can sort of like modify the table. So if you wanted to have an input table, do some checks, and then do a summary on the table, and then do different checks, that could be done. And that's all done with preconditions. So at any given step, you can modify the table. You just give it like a function or an expression right here, and you can create new columns. You could inject a brand new table, as long as like the columns you use are in that new table, you should be fine, right? So there's a way to, per step, mutate the table, or even throw in a new table. Pretty much anything goes, as long as you have a table in the end. It checks for it being a table. Then you are good. So you can basically do any sort of like specialized transformations and then checks in the same validation report. Yeah. Okay, did I miss a question in between? Yeah, okay. Can you use elements of scan data, map of missing data, and use as part of a report you send after validation? Unfortunately not. That's really kind of trapped inside of the scan data report. I don't have that exposed as a separate function, although that's a really good idea. It'd be a really obvious one that I missed. But we can change that. If you would be so kind as to drop an issue in the Pointblank repository requesting that feature, I can definitely work on that, because it seems like we should make that a separate thing. Grouping the data by multiple columns. Seems like segments might do it. Yeah, there's two ways to go about it. You can either contract or split out, and that's what those two different arguments allow for. And Camille will make that issue. Sweet. Good. Okay, I think I'm caught up with questions, unless I missed another one, but I don't think I did, because yeah, we are good. Okay, any more questions about scan data? I guess not, right? Otherwise they would be there by now. Okay, let's take a look at our scheduling. Okay, so modules 2 and 3, let's go to the next module. That would be using the expect _* and test _* functions. What does that even mean? Okay, more functions apparently. So those validation functions used previously with an agent have two sets of variants, taking the forms expect and test. Okay. What does that mean? So if you look at, I'll show you really briefly. If you go back here and we scroll down to all these functions, they're in like sets of 3. We have call vals less than, and then we also have expect call vals less than, and also test call vals less than. And we have that seemingly all the way down. Okay, so we have variants of each of these functions within this set. So you have 36 plus 36 plus 36, essentially, of all these functions. But what do they do? Okay, so let's take a look at the first set, the expect prefix functions. This basically indicates that these functions are to be used in a test that unit testing workflow. Has everybody used, no one's going to answer me, but if you ever used test that, you'll see that a lot of functions are like expect, then something. Like there's like dozens of these functions, and some of them even look kind of the same as what we have here in Pointblank, greater than or greater than to equal. So essentially what I've done in Pointblank is adapt a lot of these validation functions to be test that functions. Okay, so if you have for instance, you make a package and say you create some data set as part of a function, you may want to test that data set, just quickly using a bunch of expect _ functions based on all those validation functions we looked at earlier. It's kind of a nice way to sort of like quickly test the data that a function might produce, or that's one use case anyways. Okay, so that's expect. So basically adapting those point blank validation functions to be expect functions to be used with test that workflows. Great. Survey. That's the question I wanted to ask. That's the way to do it. You create a survey.
There you go.
A poll. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. And a lot of people have used it, which is good. It's a great package. I use it all the time. So test underscore is a bit different. It's even simpler though. What it does is it gives you logical outputs, either true or false. Okay. So basically, you might do, instead of like call vals less than, it'll be test call vals less than. And then if everything passes, it's kind of like true. If something doesn't pass, that's false. So false becomes fail, and true becomes, or pass becomes true. Okay, so let's take a look at them, at all that in practice with a few exercises. So let's look at, getting lost surveys here. Testing the values in column C of the small table data set. So let's look at small table again, right there. Great. And column C, let's look at that particular vector as we pull it out. Okay, say for instance, we have an expectation that all values can be between 0 and 10, and any values, which we do have here, are permitted. They won't signal a failing test unit. So we can use expect call vals between. So previously we used call vals between. Now we're using expect call vals between for that. So you may have this in a test that, file, in a test file. Say you create something different than small table, like use the function, you create a data table. You want to test that to make sure that the values are right. Let's run this. What do you get? You get nothing, because you really get nothing in test that when things pass. It's totally fine. It's only when things fail that we get signaling to the framework of test that. So we get this. We injected our little message, but if you use that in a test that workflow, run the tests, it would, in the test that reporter, it would show like this didn't pass. Okay. So so it just happens that there's 36 expect functions. It's a lot. So because of that, if you want to test your data set in a test that framework, you might take this approach. It's a little bit wild, but it's stringing together two different things. You can use draft validation to generate a validation plan with a data set as the primary input. And then with that file, or you can use the write test that file function. This is a function we haven't looked at yet, to create a test that.r file using the agent from the draft validation file. Okay. So let's take a look at that. I've written these files out. So draft validation, let's use game revenue. It's a data set in the Pointblank package. It's a lot bigger than small table. It's got 2,000 rows instead of just a few, like 8. And so it's a bit bigger. Okay. And so I made that file here. It should be here. Game revenue. Right here. Here it is. Okay. So game revenue validation. So we ran that and we got this. Everything from library up until the bottom agent is what's given to you. Okay. So you can take that, run it, get the agent, and then use this function right here called write test that file. Okay. So you provide the agent, you give this a new name, it'll automatically append a test hyphen to it, and you specify where you want it. You may want it in a, for instance, like in your test folder. But in this case, I just want to put it into the working directory. Okay, so game revenue. So here it is right there. So let's look at that. So what Pointblank has done is it's generated this little header generated by Pointblank. Put library in there. It got the data because that's the initial data set, so it has to do that somewhere. So it basically makes a new test that testing area, and then like an expect function within each of these with the comment that, like pertains to like each of these tests. So you can run down it. It's quite a bit, which is quite nice. This is stuff you didn't have to write. You just had to do 2 different functions, which is basically like draft validation, create the agent, and then introduce that agent to test that file. Then you have this. So yeah, this is a good way of like taking like some sort of output you created through a function, for instance, in a package, and then splitting that into a bunch of tests. Okay. Any questions about that? I'm going to check the chat.
I think you got one.
Okay, I do have one. Okay, so how would Pointblank be used for testing in our own custom package? Added to suggest and library Pointblank, call in the right place. Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Definitely add to suggest. If you're using stuff like this, like the expect functions, then you definitely have to do that. And then I think you do have to library it inside each of the test files, like I have here. Yeah, and then I think that's pretty much it. And I'm using this for some of my packages too, so I know it does work in practice. So, here we go. Okay, so that is the expect functions. Good stuff. And a pretty good workflow here for just quickly creating a bunch of expect functions, or basically a test that file based on a data set. So there's another set, which is the set of function variants which begin with test underscore. Again, oh, I got a raised hand. Is that real? Okay, ask the question in the chat if you can. Yeah, unless you're gonna say something, which is totally cool. Guessing it's an accident. Okay, so we have test underscore functions, 36 of them, and they're great if you want to do things like program with validations. So for instance, maybe you want to show a message that's really fine-grained, it's based on something in the data. So again, small data, look at that one more time. It's this. Okay, and we're saying here, column values should not be null in the date-time column, and they're not. Okay, let's run this. We should get a false here in the console. Great. Yeah, so this is good. So we can use this for conditionals, wherever you need like a logical value based on some sort of testing of data. This could be useful. This is another one. We can sort of like put them together with this or operator. You can test that, column values are not increasing in the date column. And that column values in A are not greater than 1. I believe it's false in both cases, or true in both cases. I'm not sure. Anyways, this gives you an error because like if you run these both, we'll run them individually. It's a little confusing when you have like the negation operator, but that's false. But this one is true. So this whole thing becomes true, and there are problems with small data or a small table. Okay, at least as we sort of like formulated this conditional. So kind of cool. I mean, they're there, the test functions. They're kind of useful. Say, for instance, you want to maybe send an email or not. We can use a test function, right, based on something. Or we can use the xlist. Totally up to you. We can use many ways to like create that conditional about whether an email is sent or not. Or if you're using connect, there's this option where emails are always sent unless you suppress the sending of a scheduled email. So you may use something like in coordination with Blastula, you may use these functions to say, oh yeah, this validation was fine. Suppress the sending, nothing's wrong. We don't have to send that email that would state the obvious. We can just suppress it. So that can be done as well. Okay, so to sum up, we can validate tabular data and test that workflow using the expect functions there. Again, I use them. They work great. Maybe use them too. I mean, it's more rare to test data for sure in a package, but maybe your package produces data, so you may want to test that. And the test underscore collection of functions, useful when, for instance, developing conditional logic in programming contexts, just like we showed.
Rich, this is Cheryl. Just Hi, somehow I'm missing, maybe because it's early on my side of the country.
Yeah.
So what's the overall like point of this module? Like, so we've done the other modules where we have, some validation steps that we know we want, and then this seems
Yeah.
to kind of create like a draft based on the data. Is that true? And then
Yeah. So
the
were you
testing, what's the point of test that? I haven't used it, or like, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll sum up pretty quickly. So test that is super useful for testing functions, like whether they're right or like the outputs of a function are correct or not, like the results. So if you're making a package, you may want to add a lot of tests to make sure things are functioning correctly. And you do that with the test that package and framework, really. And you tend to run the tests on, like CI, you run them you can run them manually, but you can run them each time you make changes. You can see whether your changes broke your tests.
Gotcha.
And what I'm saying with Pointblank is sometimes your package, it may create some data, like based on some known data set, and you expect certain values. And you want to verify that those values are always the same. They don't change when you change some functions, for instance. So you can basically use these adapted validation functions in the test that workflow.
Okay.
And that whole thing with draft validation, what that does is you just give it a data set. You just point to a data set, and it'll try to whip up a whole bunch of validation functions for you in a workflow. So basically, you don't have to do it. You don't have to like start from like a blank window, like a blank editor window. You just like start with something at least. You can delete things, change things around. It's merely a suggestion of what you can put in. The values may not be totally correct. You can tweak them. It's basically just modeling the set of like steps based on the data, whether it's correct or not at that point.
Back to you.
All right, I'll share my screen, share my video, and off we go to the next set of modules. And this will be the last two modules in like one sort of combined session before Ramanathan gets here and shows us his cool shiny app, which is based on Pointblank. So this fourth one is called Scaling Up Data Validation with the Multi-Agent. Because the idea here is that data validation is not usually, like sometimes it's done once or twice, but more often it's the case where you want to run it multiple times. As data comes in, gets refreshed, you want to check your data continuously again and again. And there might be multiple tables. So you really have to have some tools which allow you to scale up and make that whole thing a bit easier. So yeah, again, your data quality process may involve lots of validation runs or lots of variety. So variety and velocity is the key here. So we have a way to at least create some sort of like audit trail of your validations, and that's writing your agents to disk. We can do that with the xwrite disk function. And you can use that with a Pointblank agent, but really you can use that with all sorts of different artifacts or objects you create in Pointblank. It just allows you to write that thing to an RDS file. So yeah, super useful if you want to save the interrogation results. It's part of a larger data quality process. So here's an example where we take some simple validation based on small table again. We're calling it a daily check of small table. And we write it to disk. Okay, so let's run each of these steps. There we go. Got that. Got a warning, stop and notify. Doesn't sound too good. Let's look at the report. It's always good to look at this thing. See what we're dealing with. Okay, so there it is. So we got all the usual things, just to review as well. We got the warn, stop, and notify thresholds sort of activated, and they're being used, and they're being tripped here. In this case, rows distinct, not distinct in all cases. And this validation step, expect all values in C should be less than or equal to 5. Not the case for 8 different cells in that column, which is column C. Okay, so we do get this. Okay, so we could do a thing where we write the agent to disk. I'm not going to do that right here because I have a bunch already on disk, I do believe. It's small table tests. So I'm not going to overwrite that, but I'm going to show you that you do run this, and you can do a cool thing where we take this we can affix a date. This is a little helper function or utility that Pointblank provides. It's the simplest thing, really. It just appends like the date to the end of any string you give it. And there's also options for position, delimiter, whether you got UTC time or not. Just sort of good stuff to have when you're storing things and you want to store them in the right order and be good about storing it. And just so you know, there's also another function. If you're really running tests a lot, you can do a fixed date time, and it's the same sort of thing, except it gives the time as well as the date. So if you're running multiple tests in a day, it'll you don't want to overwrite the previous tests. You probably want to use date time. Okay, but anyways, we can write that to disk, and I have a bunch written to small table tests right here. These were done last year over a period of a few days, and these are RDS files, and very cool. Because they're RDS files, we can always get them back again. So we can read agents from disk. These are basically agents written to disk. So yeah, we have them here in this folder, and this is part of the workshop materials here. You'll get that folder. It's there. And it's also in the repository, which is Pointblank Workshop. They're all in there. And we can read these files from disk using xread disk. So write disk, xwrite disk is to write them, and xread disk is to read them back in. And we need to specify a file name, of course, to be specific, and an optional path. Otherwise, it assumes that you're using the working directory. So let's read this in. Okay, and it echoes that the agent has been read from this, so that's good. And we can just run it again. And we should get the same data validation report from it, whether we run it here or over here in the console. It's really the same thing. So we have the data, we have everything still there in terms of audit stuff, like the data was run and basically when it finished. And then, other things, if you can include a label, that's all there. Basically, everything's the same. So good stuff. So we may have a number of these. But what if you want to create a combined data validation report? You want to have not just one thing at a time, but multiple of these reports in one document. So a common task might be to see how data quality is changing over time. If you have multiple saved agents that check the same table, we can make a combined validation report, and it shows all these validations. So we have these 5 files here, and they're written out here as well. So let's get them all in the same report. So to do that, we have to make another object. It's called the multi-agent. And that object has its own function right there called get multi-agent report. We're customizing the layout and content of that report. But first we got to create the multi-agent. So there's a function just for that, create multi-agent. In this case, we're doing something, it's a little bit silly. We're getting all the different agents and we're just passing them in as a list here. And we're just gonna run that right now. Great. And the echoing is just from each of these small statements inside being read. Okay, so let's actually run this multi-agent. Okay. Doing it in the console, so it appears over here in the viewer. Okay, and so now we got here is what's called Pointblank Validation Series. We can change the title of that just as we did before with get multi-agent report. And what it does, it just stacks them on top of each other. So we have all basically there's a double line between each of these. And it shows them all. It depends, the reporting may change. We have less validation steps here. We have more here, and we have just one here. So things changed. It was the same small table data. You should always keep, report having the same target table. But it really changed quite a bit. But we can still stack them. It's kind of nice. So that's the default view. We basically stack them into a long report. Okay. Just when you run multi-agent, that's the reporting you get, the default reporting. But you could use get multi-agent report and customize reporting. And you can even change the layout of the reporting. So here, display mode, we're going to choose wide. So this is a bit strange. What we're going to do is we're not going to stack them. We're going to create one table which tries to get day after, report after report as a separate column each time. It sounds a little bit strange, a little bit easier to show than to explain at this point. So let's take this whole thing and I'll run it right here in the console. I'm also going to change the title. So wide report for multiple table validations. Because it's wide, I'm going to widen this a little bit too. Okay, and it's a bit on the small side. I'm going to try to like do this a bit. Okay, so what's even going on here? So you may imagine a situation where you check the same table, in a regular manner. There's some period, you do multiple checks. This is the time, the date and time of the check. So you can grab that from the agent itself. It has that data inside of it. And here is like a summary for each validation step, what the results were. Right. This is the order it's in. This is how many pass or fail units you got in terms of fraction. And this is whether you got any warnings, stop notification. So really super summarized. You're not getting a lot of the other stuff in there, but we're really just distilling it down to what happened, like what passed, what failed, because we got a lot of data. We have to fit it in somehow. And the cool thing about this report is it really adapts to what steps you have. You may tweak the steps, remove them. They may not be there. You may add new ones as time goes on. So this report, what it shows here is a little hash. It just means like that is like a unique identifier for all the parameters that go into that step. So if they match, basically all the parameters are the same. They're essentially the same check, and they could be compared across, and they occupy the same row, right? We also have facilities for things like you can pause certain steps, like deactivate them. That's what this graying out does. And some steps just fail. Like you can like say you use the wrong column, for instance, or something was wrong in your inputs. It just shows them in red here. But yeah, you can sort of see across things change. And if you have more than just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this will expand as well. You get a wider report, and things will just scroll to the right, and it'll keep the header in place. So it's good whether you have like just a few agents, or if you have like dozens and dozens of agents, you can scan across and sort of see how things change over time. Okay, so that's the wide report from get multi-agent report. You don't get it by default. If you just run the multi-agent after using create multi-agent, you'll just get the stacked report. Because there's no assumption that you're running a D after date, things like that. Okay, so just in this little module, just a few tools for saving your validation agent to disk and retrieving it from disk. And then creating a report that includes multiple agents, maybe saved from disk, usually saved from disk, because why would you have multiple of these at one time? That's the usual workflow. So yeah, save it to disk, read them back. This is good for keeping records of data quality. And you can always go back to a previous time and understand, where it was at that time. And again, multiple agents can be combined together, and you can get a specialized report, long or wide, which is this right here. This is wide. Okay, I'm going to check the chat because it's been a little while since I've seen that. And we'll scroll down. Does X write disk embed the original data into the output RDS file for reproducibility? You have a choice. And it does kill the data or remove it if it's a database, obviously. It's not going to pull in tons of data. But I think by default, it does keep the data in there. And you can see that with get agent xlist. You can always pull like the original data from there. In some cases, it won't keep the extracts. I think there's a switch there to keep it or not, because sometimes these extracts could be really huge, even though there's a limit of 5,000 rows on each of these. So we got to be wary when saving stuff, especially as data become really big, whether we're going to keep it in these large artifacts. But there's at least choices in these files to keep them or not. And the defaults are hopefully reasonably set for most cases. Is it possible to have different action levels between agents when you create? Yeah, awesome. Is it possible to have different action levels between agents and then create a multi-agent? I think you can't like post assign action levels to an agent which has already been run. Once you run the data on, once you run the agent or the interrogation on the data as it was that time, you can't really change the action levels. Although it seems like that should be possible as a thing afterwards, but it's not currently possible. Yeah, but you could do it if you had to like rerun things and get different action levels. You could essentially get the data from the object to that state, rerun it, change with the new actionables settings, and rerun the entire series. It seems like sort of possible to recreate as long as you get the data at that state and you did save the data in those objects. It's a bit of a iterative process and maybe a little bit prone to error, but that should work if it wasn't set properly or in the way you wanted initially. Okay. Oh, yeah, I think that's it for questions. Yeah, just two. Great. So I'll move on to the next section right here. It's called Intro to Data Documentation. So data documentation, it goes by lots of different names. Sometimes it's called data dictionaries, and sometimes it's called metadata reporting. Here I call it data documentation. Really, it's all kind of the same sort of thing. You're describing the data, what's in a table, using text, really. And the reason you do that is for yourself or for others. Yourself, maybe in the future, if you don't remember quite what was in that data table. And for others, it's a great sort of like onboarding thing you can have. So let's go through that. So we have a whole set of functions, a whole workflow based on that. So let's start with small table. It's a really small table. We should be able to get this done pretty fast because we only have a few columns to document right there. Okay. And these ones really have not much meaning, like what can you say about A or B? Not much, but we can sort of play around at least with the functions and we can sort of see how it's applied to real data. So let's start with that. The first thing you do is use the create informant function. So instead of create agent, it's create informant. And it's a little bit different than the agent object. Let's just actually run this whole thing. I'll run this here. And then just type informant, and we'll get a printout. Okay, so we get this. It looks somewhat similar to the validation report, but not really. Instead, it says point blank information. You can change this, thankfully. This is not that great. All changeable. But it tells you a few things which are, about the table. A little more tuned towards like knowing what's in the table, like the amount of rows, number of columns, that it's a table. And we get this section here called columns. There's not much in there. It just tells you the columns, what types they have. And that's kind of it. Because, this function can't really know what's in the table. You have to describe it yourself. But thankfully, we have a number of functions to do that. And they're kind of fun to use. There's one called info tabular. With that, you create a top level section. It pertains to the data table as a whole. So you can describe what the table is, what it does, what it's used for. Info columns. This is where you add info for each table column. Okay, so there's nothing here in this. We have to add some info. Okay. And then info section. This just allows you to provide all sorts of information like details, miscellany, create new sections, add info within sections. It's pretty wild, but you can add a lot of information that way. So let me show you all these in like one large statement here. So let's do it one step at a time, just to make it more fun too. So here we're going to create an agent. There we go, based on small table, same thing as before. So let's run info tabular. In the description field, we'll just say this table is included in the point blank package. So I'll run that. So now we got it here, kind of cool. So it creates a table section, and then we call it this subsection description. We can include as many as we want, and we just include some text. And markdown is sort of included as a thing by default. So we're going to use one sort of invocation of info columns. We'll focus on datetime. That's the first column. And we'll say, this column is full of timestamps. Okay, let's run that. There we go. We call this info. That's the name of the little section here. And there's the text. Great. Now, finally, info section. This one's a bit more to it, but this will happen at the very bottom. It says here, section name, further information, creates a big section, kind of like table, but further information at the bottom. And then a subsection, examples of documentation. Again, we can use markdown inside here, create like links. It's quite nice. These links work. They take us places. And we can include as much information about, when this data set is like processed, for instance, who's the maintainer of this data set, things like that. Okay. So run this whole thing again. just so we have the object. Great. So yeah, now it's more filled up with information. Obviously, you can go further and fill up more of these columns, give information. But you can sort of see where it's going. Once you have this all filled out and customized, this is a great sort of lasting document, which tells anybody what's in this data set, if this data set is worth documenting, that is. Okay. And this just goes through all the different things. Let's add some more stuff to it. Let's see, informant. This table is not regularly updated. So you can keep adding. You can use info tabular again, and then just add another section, updates. It's not regularly updated. It's true. And then we have another section. So it's very additive. We can even add more stuff to the columns as well, just by, even on the same column, it just adds more text, which is good stuff. So the table section, just to describe more about it, it's a great place to put all the information about the table. Some ideas are like a high-level summary of the table. You can say what its purpose, its importance is, what each row of the table represents, good information to have, the main users of the table within an organization. You can give some details about how this table is generated through a pipeline, for instance. And you can give some information on the frequency of updates, like is it, right here we said not regularly updated, but we can say it's daily, it's updated daily, for instance. And here we have the columns section right in the middle. We didn't do much here, but here's an example where we use penguins from Palmer penguins, and we just describe everything. So we can even do things like use select helpers. Any columns that end with we can say, we can add a bit of text at the end and say in units of millimeters. So we started by saying in detail what build length meant, what build depth, flipper length, and we just added to each of these columns, each of these sections, this little bit of information. Yeah, let's run this. Let's run this. It's a lot, but it'll be good to run. So let's go right here, and I'm also going to run over here, so it's a little bit larger. Here we go. And just like with the validation report, it gives you the time that this ran. This is pretty useful because we can also do a thing where you can grab information from the data set itself and use that as text within, within the descriptions of the columns. Okay, super useful stuff. Right here, we just sort of like hard coded all the sample data in, but we can actually get that from the data. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about the extra sections with info section, which is at the very bottom. So we'll continue along with the informant of Palmer penguins, and we'll just say like the source of the data, what it is. We'll call it references, and then we'll put all the different journal references in, and then a note in that section, originally published in, then again, another journal reference. So let's run this. Okay, and then I'll put it in the console here, run it again. So much longer now. So now we have all the references, and these links do go to the actual journal pages because they're DOIs, and they just go there, which is great. This one doesn't because we didn't make it a link. There we go. So more ideas, because ideas are good to go in these separate sections. We can put in any info related to the source of the table data, definitions or explanations of the terms used above, person is responsible for the data table, further details on the production of the table, important issues with the table, sort of notes on upcoming changes, for instance, links to other information artifacts that pertain to this table, report generation metadata, which might be things like update history, persons responsible, instructions on how to contribute, lots of ideas, lots of notes you can put in at the bottom. Okay. And there is a separate function for customization of the informant report, that is get informant report. If we were to run this, we can do this. And we can change the width of the table. We can make it wider or more narrow. Depends where you want to embed this information. Sometimes that's useful. And we use a special keyword here for the title. Sometimes you don't want, well, most of the time you don't want this. You actually want the name of the table to go at the top. So we have a special keyword called table name, and it's surrounded by colons. So let me show you that. So it just runs, it just says penguins. And we have a label, penguins data set from the Palmer penguins package. And it looks pretty good. And we changed the width a little bit. We made it, I think, a bit more narrow. And another cool thing you can do is, because this report looks great, there's a function in the package called export report. And you can use this with the agent report as well. I just didn't go through that before. So whether you have an agent or an informant, you can put that in here. And then it always creates an HTML file, like a standalone file. In this case, it's, we're going to call it informant penguins. We can call it whatever we want. Just end up with HTML. And then it should be here, right here, informant penguins. I can open it in the web browser and we can sort of see it. Looks pretty good. And it's all self-contained and looks pretty good pretty much anywhere. You want to embed HTML. So some ideas are connect, Gordo pub, standalone HTML file you might want to send, all good ideas. It's possible to have attributes for the labels. Sort of. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Can you expand upon that? And I'll get back to it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so like if you use Haven or SJ labeled, or you come from Stata like I do, you sometimes store the labels for the variables and the attributes, and the info columns part, it seemed like that would be helpful. If
Yeah. I think you can. So let's look at safety data, which I know has that. Let's do create informant. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Oh no, they don't. Oversight on my part. Yeah, they don't have the labels, which they should. So that's definitely an issue for me to make an enhancement. Because yeah, they're there in the like the scan data report, but not here, which would be super useful actually. So that's the thing for me to do. So I'll say soon for this one.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, that's basically it. There's another module on top of this we're not going to get through because Ramanathan should be sharing his portion of the workshop now. Oh, Phil, is Ramanathan here?
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, excellent.
He is here.
Okay, excellent,
Welcome.
excellent. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop. I'm just going to say that there's more to this. You can actually, I'm just going to describe quickly. You can actually make little snippets and get things from your data and include them as part of the text. It's all inside like the article in the Pointblank website. It should be the last part of the like information management workflow. But it's a cool thing. It allows you to grab data actually from the data set itself and integrate that into the descriptions of the columns. It's all things big. It's all to do with info snippet. Pretty cool stuff. We won't get into it because it's kind of a bonus thing. It's very extra. So we'll just like leave it at that. And I'm going to hand it over to Ramanathan. And I'll take questions later as well. It's a sum up thing.
Beautiful. We can see it. And if you want to go into presentation mode or leave it that way, we can. It looks great to me. So.
Okay, maybe I'll keep it something like that. Because
that's perfect.
Great, fine.
That's good. Yep.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ramanathan Perumal. I am part of our Center of Excellence at Pfizer. So today I'm going to talk about my current work on reproducible and flexible data validation workflows with Pointblank and Shiny. So, I mean, I don't want to take too much time on talking about data validation and all the things, but the key points here is like we have to ensure the integrity and reliability of the information finally being used in the graph or chart or anything. So this is very important factor here. And generally this process involves like checking for errors, inconsistency, and other potential issues with the data. And generally, so what it means like if you start from the poor quality data, which may leads to the poor quality results, and finally you are going to end up with the poor quality decisions. So this is very important here, data validation. So There are a number of packages are available in cron for data quality assessment or maybe data validation. And we got inspired from this particular paper. This paper is like our packages for data quality assessments and data monitoring. It's a recent paper, last 2022. And this particular paper, they have reviewed close to 28 packages from cron. And they did multiple validation checks with the sample data. For example, integrity, completeness, consistency, accuracy, and all other few other stuff like reproducibility, programming, or descriptive summary statistics, all the things like so they have multiple validation checks with the packages. And finally, they have provided different tables and graphs and everything. So what we are looking into this table is like one thing is like missing in most of the packages are the graphical user interface functionality. Like not only with the Pointblank, we also found that there are multiple packages have some issues with the graphical user interface. It's because it's difficult to implement those things. So, I mean, you know that, I mean, Pointblank is one of the very popular package in R for data validation and quality assessments. And you can see from this number of downloads, this is this particular graph I have taken from that particular paper. And here you can see like it's a very rapidly increasing the number of downloads. Like, so in Pointblank, we have too many validation functions are very powerful. And out at the end, we are going to get a standalone HTML reports, which contains all the informations. So, I mean, as Rich mentioned that he mentioned that there are close to 36 validation functions, but in our Shiny application, we have implemented close to 28 validation functions. So those things are grouped into different categories. Like if you want to check data types like a numeric, integer, or if it is a numerical value, if you want to check like whether the value is less than some particular value, if you want to check the values in between those two values like left and right, or if it is a categorical variable, if you want to check some particular pattern in your column, you can use regex. Or if it is a factorial variable, for example, sex, I mean male, female, those things you can check with the set validation functions. Apart from these validation functions, there are some standard validation rules like duplicated records or missing data also can be done with our application. So everything is good with Pointblank, but its effectiveness hindered by the requirement of the programming skills in R. I mean, if you know R programming, it's easy for you. If it's an R programmer, constructing the validation rules and workflows can be a challenging task. And it's impeding their ability to fully leverage the Pointblank's potential. What it means, like if you're looking into the right-hand side, you can see that it's a sample like a Pointblank validation report. Here, it's very scary for the beginners or maybe some kind of beginners in R programmer. So if you want to construct a bit kind of complex validation workflows, it's difficult for you. So our motivation is that how do you make Pointblank more accessible for the to the non-R programmers? So this is our motivation for this particular work. Our methodology is like to develop user-friendly Shiny application as a wrapper for the Pointblank. So we are not doing any validation or anything. Just our application is kind of a wrapper for on the top of the Pointblank. And the next thing is like, what if the validation needs to be performed regularly? Like if you want to make some automation kind of thing, so what do you do? What do you need to do? Like, so what we are building is like we are building two complementary Shiny application. So the first application guides the users through the data import. For example, you can import it from your local computer and do the selection and validation test construction. We are capturing that user input as a YAML file. Like Risha already mentioned that we can capture all the validation rules and everything as a YAML file. And the second application utilizes the YAML file to replay the validation process for the new data. What it means, like once you have the YAML file, you just replay with the second application with the new data. And it will help you to reproducibility and flexibility for the automation purpose. So this is a schematic of our overall framework. And as I mentioned that we have two different applications, Shiny application 1 and Shiny application 2. In the Shiny application 1, you can load different kind of data sets. and we have provided data filtering options kind of thing. Like for example, data range input, select size input kind of thing. You can filter your data. You can get the subset of your data. And then the validation function we have provided is a drag and drop option. Like for example, you can just drag and drop different validation functions, and you can pass the parameters to the validation options. Like, and out of this functionality, you can create the validation report with a Pointblank, and you can also download as a YAML file. This is an important important step in the application one. It's purely for the beginners. Like even you don't need to know anything about Pointblank. It's just like a graphical user interface. Like you can just drag and drop. You can click and all the things. Everything is like very intuitive, very easy to use. And the application two, we have provided multiple options to load the data from local computer or cloud storage as a pins data kind of thing. And even we are also loading the data, YAML data from the pins. And you can edit the YAML file. For example, if you want to customize your YAML file, the next step, for example, like in the previous step, application one, you have tested age less than 72 or something like that. In the next step, like the new data, you want to change into 72 to 82. We have provided a custom text editor kind of thing inside our Signing application. So just you load the YAML file, edit the value, and just get the report. So this is the overall workflow for our framework. And so tech stack overview, something like that. We can load different kind of data sets like SAS, XPT, XLS, and all the formats. And you can load from our Shiny application. And even you can iterate the overall process. Like for example, you can create multiple YAML files, and if you're satisfying some particular condition, and then pass the YAML file into RStudio Connect, store it as a pins data. And for the ideal case, like for the ideal case, if you have a new data, it's updating every day morning or something like that. So the new data comes from the pins as a pins data, and the validation is checking from the Pointblank, and everything is reported from the R Markdown or Quattro reports. Like, so for example, if there is any abnormality in your data, if there is any failing condition or something like that, it will trigger the events, and you will be getting email from the RStudio Connect. So this is the overall Stack Overflow kind of thing. And we are also trying to implement the Plumber API as a Pointblank. For example, like this is still under development stage. For example, once you create the Plumber API and deploy it in RStudio Connect, then we can make a front end, like a front end dashboard can be a Python or any other languages. Like, so backend will be a Pointblank as a Plumber AST API, and the front end will be Python or something like that. So this is also, we are currently exploring it, this possibility. And if everything's successful, then this will be some kind of our overview. So maybe now I'll go to the demo session. Please let me know if you have any issue or something like that with her. Can you see the browser screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great, fine. This is the data quality assessment application one. So as I mentioned that we have provided different options like to load the data. For example, if you have the data set from GitHub or some online storage, you can just provide the URL and you can load the data. And if it is a small data, just cut, copy, and clipboard, and you can paste it here. At the moment, like I'm just showing you from the local computer, I'm just loading the data from my test data set like ADSL XPT. It's a sample data. So here it say like how many observations and how many variables and everything. Everything comes from the data modes. There is a very famous package in R. It's a data modes. So with we just couple with the data modes and Pointblank to create this particular application. So I'm just loading the data. So our process flow is something like that. We are loading the data, and then we can update the data set and filter and scan, and finally validation condition. So this is our process flow kind of thing for the application one. In the update stage, you can see all the columns and what are the characteristic of the columns, like class. And if you want to change the class into new variable or something like a new other category, you have the option for that. And it will quickly give you the overview of the data. And for example, if your data set have different column names, if you want to make a unique column names, we have provided option. You just click here, and it will create the unique column name from the janitor package. Like, so sometimes like your data sets contains a improper column names or something like that. So that time this particular option will be useful for you. You can just click and you can create the unique column. Or if you want to select only for the particular columns, just like click those columns you want to make a validation, you just click those columns. For a test case, I mean, just clicking all columns. And we have also provided another option for sampling that for the data set. For example, at the moment, we have close to 254 observation. If I need 10% of the data, I just click the data. I click this button. It will only create, I mean, subset the data of 10% of the original data. For example, your case, your data set will be very big, 1 million data, 2 million data, something like that. You want to make only the sample out of the data set. You can create the random sampling from this option. And the next stage is like apply changes if you're happy with it. And it says like data successfully updated. And the next stage is like a filtering option. And here what it means, like if you want to subset your data, like maybe you need to check like only female patients or male patients or something like that. You can do the subset category, place a bow or something like that. And you can, if you can select only for the particular patient or something like that. You can do all the things like from here. And we have provided two options, like only the head of the data, or maybe the full data if you want to store the data. And once you're happy, you just click the filter condition. And even we have also provided another option to download the subset data, like filtering data. Like for example, like this is kind of a deployer filtering option. This data set may be useful for some other purpose, like maybe data visualization or some other purpose. You can just download the data. Maybe you can use it for any other purpose. Like so, there is a small option here we have provided, and everything is okay for you. Then go to the next stage, scanning. And this scanning is like we have two different options. Like for example, I just click that a minimal scan. It will just give you the overview and sampling of the data, because generally this process takes time. Like if you're clicking that advanced stage, that OVICMS, like that multiple options we have provided, depending on your time. Like generally, if you are making a interaction or maybe correlation, generally this process takes time depending on your data and depending on number of columns you have. So what I generally suggest, like you start with the minimal the profiling, and if you want to make any other specific category, you can just click and then do the scanning. So here it's a general table scan report, and you can see all the things like as already mentioned, Rich mentioned that all the functionality, everything is provided here. And just I'll quickly go to the next step. The next stage is like important here, like it's a validation. And here all the validation rules and everything comes here. Like for example, I'm selecting like age and maybe race or something like that, maybe PMI. Okay, I'm just choosing only three columns. And whenever you choose some particular column, it's automatically creating dynamic tab panels kind of thing. So you can see all the tab panel, like it's validation function for PMI BL. And so it's everything is dynamic one. Like if you click the select all function, at the moment, like we have too many columns, it takes few seconds to load all the columns, and everything is dynamically. And so that's why I'm just choosing, like for a demo purpose, I'm just choosing only 3 columns here. And once you choose some particular columns here, this is the validation functions I mentioned that. I mean, we can just drag and drop condition. For example, I just check column value less than LT, or if column value is not null. And maybe I just like column values between, because it's a numerical column, I know that. And I can choose this validation functions. It's a drag and drop condition. If I don't want something like that, I just go back to the original state. And if there is any input it's required for the particular validation function, everything is provided on the right hand side. Like for example, like column value is less than, so exactly the same name we are using it here. And if you want to understand what exactly it means, like you just hover over there, and it will give you that some kind of help text for you, like what it means, and what exactly you need to pass to the text box and all the information. So for example, I just say like 75, age less than 75, I'm just checking. And we have provided multiple options like column value set, or if it's a reprex and rejects and all the condition we can pass. For it, I mean, for a test purpose, I'm just choosing only one. And the action level is a globally we can select, like we can provide multiple values like depending on your case. And if you are satisfying with the action level conditions, you just submit. And then you just click that Pointblank report generation here. It takes maybe 3 to 4 seconds to create the report. Here you can see that, I mean, we just applied multiple validation conditions, and we are just checking age less than 75, and out of 105 is passing and 149 is failing condition, and outlier all the information I already Rich discussed about this report. So the important thing is here, like we have provided multiple options to download the report and YAML files. Like for example, you can just download this standalone HTML file as a separate file. And here you see like we are just with a timestamp, we are just downloading the file. And this file is like a standalone report, like you don't need any Shiny or anything. It's a standard HTML file from Pointblank, and this can be sent via email or any other standard formats. Like, so this is a one option we have provided. And just give me, yeah. So the next thing is that you can download a YAML file. This is the important step. I already mentioned that. So this looks something like that. That YAML file looks something like that. There is a value like where 75 we are passing into that, and the action level conditions and the timestamp and everything we have provided. And this is a YAML file. We are using it in our next application too. And even we can also download the test that file, like Rish already mentioned that it will be something like that. All the conditions we are passing, value, threshold, and everything like so. This is a standard stuff like for the new data can be used. And yeah, these are the things you can get from the application 1. Now I'm moving to the application 2. Yeah. So application 2 looks something like that. I mean, just give me 2 seconds. Okay. Application 2 looks something like that. Here you have to load data set and the YAML file. And data set, as I mentioned that there is an option to load from your local, the same thing from the first application. And here there is an option to load the data from the pin storage. Like for example, I'm just storing the same data as a pin storage. And here you just pass that URL of the pins data, just get the data. You get the data and just confirm it, and you're loading the data from pins. And then again, you can, if you want to load your local YAML file, or maybe I'm just loading that previously saved YAML file from pins data. I'm just copying it, pasting it. So this is a thing I already mentioned that this is a text editor kind of thing. Like for example, like this was an old one. So previously I have tested like the age is greater than or equal to 82. So now if I want to change into 85, I just change the values. Or if you want to include any other validation stuff or anything, you can just edit in this file, and then say like confirm the YAML file. And everything is updated now, like with a new YAML file kind of thing. Like, so even if you want to download the YAML file, this after the update, you can just download the YAML file as a later purpose. And once you are okay with the data set and the YAML file, the next stage is like creating that Pointblank, like with the new data and the customized YAML file. Here you can see like the validation condition 7. It says like so the original stuff comes from that pins data is 82, Now we have slightly changed it value into 85 here. So something like that you can customize in the application too. So what it means, like application 2 is mainly for the intermediate level or programmer kind of thing. So you need to understand what exactly the Pointblank YAML files and what are the variables you need to pass and all the information. You need to know that. Once you are familiarized with this YAML file and notations, then you can just easily edit the file in application 2 and you can just get the new YAML file kind of thing. And I'll just quickly go through the next important steps here. And there is another option we have provided, R Markdown template kind of thing. Like, so for example, like we have the data and YAML file. You want to create some kind of R Markdown quickly, and we have provided some kind of template here. Like, for example, you can type something regarding the data set, where it comes from, and what are the things required from this data set, or references or something like that. You can edit this R Markdown stuff. It's a standalone R Markdown report for kind of thing, and everything is okay for you. And just click that save configuration and render the R Markdown report. Like it takes 20 seconds or something like that to create a R Markdown stuff. I'm just opening it. So here it's a it's a just like a template kind of thing. Like we have provided just kind of what exactly the data set looks like. The top 5 number of columns, or top number of end rows, like and the report. If you want to include any other text or anything, you can just include all the information here. So this is that R Markdown stuff. And the next thing is like YAML to pins. Like for example, these are the customized YAML file currently we are holding, like in this particular application too. For a later purpose, like the exactly the same YAML configuration, you may need it for new other data or something like that. So that time, what you need to do, like we have the option to store it in your pins data. For example, I need to type my NT ID or something like that, and I can just type whatever the name or something like that, my ADSL Posit or something like that. I just type it, and then I can click it. It takes few seconds to load the data, and it will automatically write into my pins data. So later I can go to this particular my pins location, and I can see the uh, that particular agent and all the information. So how this can be useful for the automation purpose? Like for example, here we don't have option for the Plastula inside our RStudio Connect due to this security configuration, all the things in Pfizer. So what we are making it like we are creating some kind of standard Markdown reports, storing it everything in RStudio Connect. It's something like that. For sample, like it looks something like that, and we are checking the validation conditions, and we check like all past conditions from Pointblank. If it is satisfying and we don't get any reports, like we are just suppressing that Markdown report. And if it is not satisfying, if there is any failed condition in our data, automatically it will send a report to us. Like, so what we are doing it, like we are creating a scheduled report every morning around 6:30 a.m. or something like that. So whenever there is a new data around 6:15 or something like that, there is a new update in our data, and 6:30 this particular report will be generated. If there is any abnormality in our data, if there is any failed condition in our data, we are getting an email. The email should be something like that. Uh, So we are getting our email with the HTML report and all the information with the Posit location and everything. So this is something like that as an output we are getting it from the application from this standard Markdown report. And maybe quickly I'll just go through this the Pointblank stuff. So here we just try to deploy. Currently this is very early stage. Like we have created the Pointblank API, and we are testing it in our local computer because there is some error we are facing it from RStudio Connect. And for a test purpose, I'm just giving you an outline how the things are working here. So here you see like the folder structure. It will be something like that. So this is a test 2023-1016, and we have stored the data from the data folder and YAML from YAML folder, and the output we are storing it from HTML output, something like that. And so here, this is the location of our API PP2. And we are just calling the data from the data folder, YAML folder. I'm just running it here. And this is important here, like we are just calling that particular post, particular API. We post the data like with a YAML file and that ADSL data. And then we are creating the output HTML. Like so we need to do some data transformation. And finally, it will be something like that. So I'll just show you how the output looks look. So here you see like it comes from the API. Like we don't save anything in our local computer or anything. So everything is like coming from that particular API. Yeah, these are the stuff currently we are experimenting with. Maybe I'll just quickly give you the conclusion. Like so what we are building is like we are trying to build a R-based Shiny framework for particularly for Pointblank, and it will help the varying R proficiency level people, like so they can easily conduct a complete data quality assessment with our application. And the good thing is like we can do seamless integration into our existing data analysis workflow from RStudio Connect. And we are building this application is not only for the pharmaceutical industry. We are planning to make it as a generalized tool for a wide range of industries and particular domain. And there are a few things we need to consider here, like depending on the specific needs. For example, there are some particular people, they may need to do some data transformation and so data combination. Like for example, multiple CSV file you need to load, and you create the original output data, then you need to apply some kind of validation rules. So those things has to be properly implemented in our application. So we need to slightly vary our application depending on the requirement, and those things we are currently working on it. And another important thing is like most of the things are mainly dealing with that YAML metadata. So user has to understand the metadata convention from Pointblank. So that is another requirement, and we need to teach them. And yeah, these are the references for our current work. And thank you. If you have any questions, please let us know. Yeah, this is our team. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I'm now the person that owns this meeting. Phil's gone. So I'm going to invite any questions. Oh yeah, okay. So one from Nate to you, Ramanathan, is this sample app presentation available? And also, can you, references, okay.
Okay, at the moment, like everything is a internal purpose. We are currently experimenting, and we need to get a permission from our management to release that sample application or presentation. So it may take some time.
Okay, and an earlier question was, what was the name of the package with the sample data used for the Shiny app?
Data modes, like I'll share the links with you. Yeah, okay. Data modes. It's a data modes. Yeah, this is the package.
Oh, I've heard of this, but I've never seen it.
Okay.
Yeah, like this page. Yeah, this is great. Thanks for posting that.
Yeah, reference page if you want to. Just
hey, do we have any more questions before we close this out? Nope, doesn't look like it. So I'll just do a few reminders of things. So the data, or sorry, the exercises, the RMDs I used are available. Pointblank Workshop, search for that in GitHub. Oh, there's a question from Harvey. Okay, great. Can you comment on Pointblank used in CI/CD or ETL? Good question. I use it quite a bit. Basically in the test that workflow for some packages where I sort of taken a data set, and reformulate it. And I want to make sure that the ingesting of the original data set is correct, fits all the expectations. I think I use this a lot in a package I maintain called Font Awesome, where I grab a ton of fonts and it makes updates to snap. Basically, I just getting the new bundle of icons. Who knows if things change with their schema? But my checks will check that right away. It'll reveal any changes. And so far so good. And I feel confident making releases because those checks are in place. But otherwise, I don't work too much with data. I mostly do packages. So for me, I don't really use it in a sort of real world situation. Except for that one. Okay, we're waiting for more questions, but that may be it. Anything? Oh. Okay, thanks everybody for the good words. Oh, thanks for attending. Yeah, I really enjoy these workshops. They're lots of fun. Should have more of them. But once a year is not bad.
And this is Harvey here. I thought I'd just jump in to thank Rich. Phil had to leave to kick off another workshop. We've got, I think, 17 of them running over, mostly this week. So thank you so much, Rich. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.